Hello, dear friends. My topic today in this trilogy about the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe, and Sukkot, so I'd like to talk about the Sukkah. Now, our Sukkah, as I said, the festival of Sukkot in general represents this transcending from the natural level, the mitzvot between man and man, into the higher level, what I call the inner sensitivity of spirituality, which is the mitzvot between man and God. But again, you need step one in order to be in step two. And you can't build a building without step one first. The Zohar in Parshat Emor refers to the Sukkah as Tzila de Mehemnuta, which means the shade of faith. In what sense is the Sukkah the shade of faith? Well, remember, we go to the Sukkah in the fall, and the Sukkah is a flimsy hut. The walls can be strong, but the top is just made out of things that were used to be connected to the ground, but are not now, branches, wood, meaning beams of wood, not planks. And these branches or whatever, bamboo can be thrown off the sukkah by the wind. So it's a little bit flimsy. And interestingly enough, we go in the fall, not in the summer, when we would really need it against the sun. But when it's getting a little bit change of weather, a little bit cooler, we're now all of a sudden going outside to show that we're doing it as an act of faith, because we know that God watches over us. It's to remind us that it's not our house and it's not our army and our police force, but just as God took us through the desert and watched over us in the desert, so too we remind ourselves of this through the Sukkah, which the prophet Amos calls Sukkah David Hanofelet, the Sukkah of David, which is falling, in Amos chapter 9. Because the Sukkah, the temple of David, when it's not there in the times of the Galut, of the exile, it's in a state of falling. This relationship between God and Israel has to be strengthened, and it's strengthened through faith, the Jewish people. I'd like to tell a little story, which I heard from a video from the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of Great Britain. And it's a lovely story, and I'd like to tell it in this connection with the Sukkah, which is what he tells it too. He says that right after he got married, he wanted to build his own Sukkah in the house that they were living in London. You know, you have in London, and especially in the Northwest, there are these small houses, small backyards, and it's a good place to build a Sukkah on a porch in the backyard. And that was his goal. So he spoke to a friend of his who was good in things that had to do with building and making things out of wood, and sort of a carpenter, might say his hobby was carpentry, this fellow. And he said, sure, let's do it. And this guy made all these plans, and they went to one of these stores, warehouses, which have things for carpenters, and he bought nails of a certain size and all these different type of boards and windows, and he also bought some things for Rabbi Sachs, some nails and some wooden sides for the sukkah, because in those days he didn't have the pre-made ones. And took his truck, and he brought Rabbi Sachs his pieces, and he went out to his house and built a palace of a sukkah, because he was very good at it. Rabbi Sachs took his 4 boards and put them together, and somehow made his flimsy schach, and did whatever he could to have a sukkah also. Well, that night in London, there was a hurricane with very strong winds, and the sukkot were all blown down. And the next morning in the synagogue, this fellow came over to Rabbi Sachs and he said, well, my sukkah is gone in the wind. I bet that's what happened to yours too. Rabbi Sachs said, actually, no, it's still there. Man said, that's not possible. I have to see it. Let me go to your house. I want to check your sukkah. He says, of course. So the guy comes to check the sukkah, and he sees it's 4 walls, and you have something on the top. And he's wondering why these walls didn't fall down in the wind. But then he realized that one of the walls, because it was a little flimsy, to Rabbi Sachs, one of the walls he took a hammer and had a nail, hammered in a nail that connected one side of the sukkah to the house. Now the house doesn't fall down in the hurricane, so neither did the sukkah, which was connected to the house. So that one nail held up the sukkah. Then the fellow, who was the hobby carpenter, he said, I understand now the meaning of the sukkah. The sukkah is a flimsy building, and it's like the human being. We are fragile, we're flimsy. But if we are connected to something strong and immovable, that gives us strength. That thing is faith. When a human being connects themselves to faith in God, it gives us that strength that we are missing, that direction, that feeling of security of direction, the ability to believe in the ideals that we do believe in, and to follow them correctly. That's the sukkah, the tzila de behemnu. Now, interestingly enough, if I take this idea that the sukkah represents the idea of faith, all the laws pertaining to the sukkah in the Mishnah of Sukkah, which is chapter 1, by the way, in the Mishnah of Sukkah, you can actually interpret them according to this. Chapter 1, a sukkah is not supposed to be too high, not more than 20 amas. It's also supposed to be not to be too low. It's supposed to be, I made a list. It's supposed to have more shade than sun coming into it, but it shouldn't be so shady that you can't see at least the stars. It has to be made within 30 days, at least the schach on the top should be made within 30 days of the festival, or at least for the festival. It should not be connected to the ground, but it's supposed to be something that was from the ground, but now disconnected. I mean, you can't use the branches of a tree which is still alive as the covering of your sukkah. It has to be something which is not a vessel which can receive impurity. It can only be up to 20 cubits. It cannot be less than 10. And as I said, it has to be made within 30 days. How does that all connect to the idea of emunah? This is my hypothesis, but I think it's an interesting idea, and I will share it with you at this point. Let's take number 1. The sukkah is flimsy. It's something which can give mostly shade. It's not a real covering, not a regular roof. That's the fragility of life. I said that before. And it doesn't really protect you 100%. Why do you have to be able to see the stars? To remind you that the protection doesn't come from you, but from above. Now, it says about the sukkah that you have to do it. It's ta'aseh, chag sukkot ta'aseh lecha, shivat yamim. It says about the sukkah holiday, you have to do it, and not something which is already made. Because the human being, emunah, faith, is something that you have to discover. It's not enough to be born into it. As it says in the book of Exodus, Shemot, Ze Eli ve'anvehu Elohei aviv v'romamenhu, in the Song of the Sea. This is my God, and I will, could be translated different ways. I will seek gratitude. I will give him the thanksgiving, or Anveo could also beautify him. Elohei avi, but he's also the God of my father, and I will exalt him. Because God is not just the God of our fathers, but also our God. Also in the Shemon Esrei, in the main prayer, we say, Elokeinu ve'elokei avotenu, our God and the God of our fathers. It's not enough that God is the God of our fathers. He has to be our God. We have to reach faith through our own understanding, too, of what it means to us. That means that the sukkah has to be done by you and not something which was already done. In every generation, we have to do it again. And in every year, actually. So it can't be something which is connected to, so it cannot be something which is connected to the ground, because the sukkah is trying to teach us how to transcend the natural world. But it should be something that was connected to the ground, because to transcend is not to break away, it's to take things from this world and uplift them to holiness, not to negate the world. It's supposed to be something which does not receive impurity, because, as Rabbi Judah Levi said in the 11th century, that the idea that God can prophesize man, can speak to man, is the basis of belief and heresy simultaneously. If you want, it's the belief, it's the basis of belief in the one God and the belief in paganism, because the pagans also think they speak to God. So there's a fine line between pure faith and idol worship. And you have to be very careful, because it's a very big evil inclination towards idol worship. Whether it's idol worship of ourselves, we think we're so righteous and so holy, everybody should talk to us. Or whether it's idol worship in the sense that we start taking concrete things instead of God. We pray to pictures, to deceased saints, instead of talking to God, to angels instead of God. So our relationship is directly to God. We don't need any mediators. To be very careful about that. It's a very fine point and an important one to discuss. I remember one time I was walking with my father years ago in the synagogue. My father was a rabbi of a synagogue in Montreal for many, many years. 58, actually. I think it was around. It was 50, and then it became about 53, 54, because they brought it back. So one time we're walking the synagogue after the service, and a woman is walking in the women's section looking for something. My father says to her, "What are you looking for?" Because I dropped my diamond ring. I've been looking for it for 15 minutes. I look at every seat. My father looks down. Right in front of him, he sees a diamond ring, picks it up. We're in the men's section. Says, "Is this it, madam?" She says, "Yes." She was like shocked. She takes the diamond ring, starts dancing up and down. She says, "The rabbi is a miracle man. He's a miracle man." The father turns to me. He says, I try not to listen to things like that. It's not healthy. There are too many people who like when people say things like that. We have to be humble. We're not as righteous or as saintly as we sometimes like to think. That's not to say that a person has to see themselves as evil. You have to say to yourself, "I'm going to be righteous," but just don't overdo it. Don't overdo it. So that's what it means. It has to be pure faith and not something which can accept impurity, which pushes a person towards idolatry. It can only be until 20 cubits, because it has to be within your perspective. It can't be, faith cannot be transcendental, which has nothing to do with this world. It has to inspire you in this world. It cannot be less than 10 handbreadths, meaning it can't be totally connected to this world. It's not pantheism. It's not a naturalism belief. There is a transcendental part to it. In general, in halachic thinking, 10 cubits represents this world. Like in the laws of the Sabbath, where if you carry over 10 cubits, theoretically, if you could fly in the air, it's not considered carrying in public area, because 10 cubits is called this world, because we walk on the globe and we're always connected to our 10 cubits. It's also an idea, which I don't want to discuss more now, but from this point of view, faith has to be not only naturalistic, there is a transcendental side. Just like faith without a transcendental side is dangerous, so is faith only with a transcendental side dangerous. And it cannot be something which is older than 30 days, because faith has to be renewed constantly in order for it to be significant, because we have to renew ourselves constantly all the time. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov used to say that when we think about our faith in God, we realize that there's so many mistakes and so many inaccuracies that it's almost like idol worship. So we have to purify our faith in God to make ourselves pure monotheists again. And then tomorrow, the next day, we start thinking about our new faith. And again, we find inaccuracies and impurities. And again, we realize we're doing the wrong thing and we have to purify it all over again. And this is what we have to do day after day. We have to work on ourselves and let our faith mature and grow with us. I wish everybody a continued Moadim L'Simcha, happy festival. We have one more day left, 1.5 more day left of Sukkot this year. Shalom, shalom.